Hello and welcome back to Front Runner Motorsport with a third instalment of drivers who have raced in both Formula 1 and the British touring cars, looking at the highs and lows of many a driver who dared peek into both racing series. We will be going further back than ever, as a lot of today's drivers race in the British Saloon Car Championship, which was the forerunner for BTCC, and we will be having a look at a lot of older cars, which I am looking forward to. If you haven't seen the first two videos, links in the description below. The first was my first ever video. With that said, please remember to subscribe, like the video if you so want, and let's begin.
Welcome to Front Runner Motorsport.
Number 10, Kunimitsu Takahashi. I know that most of you are probably thinking the same thing I am thinking. Who the bloody hell is Kunimitsu Takahashi? Well, he is an interesting figure. All the way from Japan, he had a single race in Formula 1 with an old Tyrrell at the 1977 Japanese Grand Prix under the Maritsu racing team. He qualified 22nd of 23, but survived to finish 2 laps down and in 9th place. He has wins in motorcycle Grand Prix before his quick jaunt in Formula 1, but he would also have a single race in the British touring cars, racing a Mitsubishi Colt at Silverstone in 1985, finishing 9th and never returning. He'd have success in Japan, racing as late as 1999, and also has a third in class at Le Mans in 1996, racing for his own team, Team Kunimitsu, in a Honda NSX. His team is still going, winning the Super GT Championship in 2018 with Naoki Yamamoto and Jenson Button. So, now you know. Number 9, Vern Schuppan. Vern Schuppan is an Australian driver who I have spoken about before in my top 10 Australians list. To go through his Formula 1 career briefly, he never scored any points but entered races between 1972 and 1977. He'd raced for BRM, Team Ensign, Embassy Hill and Team Surtees, getting a best 7th for the latter at the Hockenheim Ring. He'd raced in the same Mitsubishi Colt as Takahashi, but a few rounds earlier, also at Silverstone. He'd retire from the race and never came back for another go at British touring cars. Number 8, Slim Borgard. The former ABBA drummer. I have brought that up before and it's still a weird fact to me. Drummer for ABBA, F1 racer and truck driving champion. What a life he's had. Where's his damn biopic? Slim only had a year and a bit in Formula 1 but scored a point for the ATS team in 1981 before a few races in 1982 with the Tyrrell team. He'd be the second driver partnering Tim Harvey at the endurance rounds of the 1990 British touring cars, driving the Labatt's Ford Sierra Cosworth. They'd get a second place, so technically Slim Borgard has a BTCC podium under his belt. He's also raced in Swedish touring cars as well as the Touring Car World Cup. Also, he raced trucks. Yeah. Number 7, David Hobbs. This guy has raced pretty much everything in his long and illustrious career, from Formula 1 to Le Mans to IndyCar, Bathurst to BTCC, with everything else in between. He had a short Formula 1 career, a couple of races with Bernard White in 1967, as well as a run in a Lola BMW, followed by a single race for Honda in 1968, before returning in 1971 with Penske, and a couple of races with McLaren in 1974, with a best 7th in Austria. He raced in the BSCC with Malcolm Gartland Racing in a Ford Falcon, entering 5 rounds in 1968, taking a couple of Group D victories, as well as overall victory at the Martini Trophy round at Silverstone. He also has a couple of Le Mans podiums in 1969 in a Ford GT40 and 1984 in a Skull Bandit Porsche, as well as class victories in 1962 and 1982. He's also raced at the Indy 500 with a best 5th in 1974, a 17th at Michigan in a NASCAR race, and a 2nd in class at Bathurst. What a mixed and random career. Number 6, Frank Gardiner. Someone else I have spoken about in my top 10 Australians in Formula 1 video. He raced to little success in Formula 1 with John Wilman Automobiles, with a best 8th in Australia. He has a lot more success in British touring cars. 3 championships, 35 overall wins, and a true legend from Australia. As of 2020, he is still 9th in the all-time overall race win list. It all began again with John Wilman Automobiles and a Ford Cortina, before winning his first 2 championships with Alan Mann Racing in 1967 and 1968, again in Fords. He'd switched to SCA and raced a Camaro and took his final championship in 1973. He is an absolute legend. Worship him, touring car fans. Number 5, Chris Craft. This British driver only made 1 start in Formula 1. After failing to qualify for the Canadian Grand Prix in 1971, Chris Craft, racing for the Ecurie Evergreen team, qualified 30th of 32 at the American Grand Prix and failed to finish. He first raced in the British touring cars in 1964 in a Lotus Cortina, and 23 wins later, he raced his last in 1979 in a Gordon Spice Ford Capri. His best year was 1969, when he finished 2nd overall in a Team Broadspeed Ford Escort. The only other thing of note was a 3rd at Le Mans in 1976 with Alain de Cadenet in a Lola. Number 4, Hans-Joachim Stuck. Hans Stuck had a 6-year stint in Formula 1. His first 3 years with March didn't give him much to shout about. 5 points in 1974 before getting stuck at the back. See what I did there? You should subscribe. Getting stuck at the back in 1975 before March were able to score more points in 1976. He'd leave March to join Brabham and Martini Racing to have his best season, scoring a couple of podiums, but after a year with Shadow and a final year with ATS, he left with just 1 points finish with each, and he was done with Formula 1. As for BTCC, he had 3 races in 1983 with Chesilmore BMW Motorsport getting 2 podiums at Brands and Donington. He's done alright for himself though, 2 wins at Le Mans with Rothmans Porsches and a DTM championship in 1990 with Audi. Number 3, Vic Elford. Vic Elford drove for the Cooper team in 1968, scoring 5 points, and a few more points in 1969 with the Colin Crabb team, also in a Cooper. He'd have 2 years off before returning in 1971 with the BRM team for a single appearance at the German Grand Prix, finishing 11th. He'd make his debut in the BTCC in 1961 in a Class A Austin Mini, finishing 2nd at the 1 race he entered. He'd return in 1967 in a Porsche 911 for AFN, taking 2 wins and finishing 7th overall, before a final year with Bill Bradley Racing in 1968, where he would win 2 out of 3 races before skipping the rest of the year. Out of the 12 races he entered, he retired from 2 and never finished outside the top 4 in the other 10. He could have been champion if he committed to the series. Number 2, Tony Lanfranchi. This is a bit of a cheat because Tony Lanfranchi never actually raced in Formula 1. He was entered for 2 races, the British Grand Prix in 1968 with BRM and the Canadian Grand Prix in 1969 with Falcon Racing in a Maserati Cooper. A very unlucky man, the BRM he was meant to race in 1968 caught fire in the transporter and was destroyed. Talk about your hopes and dreams going up in flames. His career in BTCC lasted from 1965 to 1989, first racing in a Mini. He also raced in a Hillman Imp, BMW 3.0 CSI, a Chrysler Hemi Cuda, Vauxhall Firenze, Volkswagen Scirocco, Audi 80, Opel Monza, Vauxhall Nova, and finally a Vauxhall Astra in 1989. He only ever won his class once in 1986 and never did better than 6th overall in 1974 in the Beamer. Number 1, Roy Salvadori. Roy Salvadori had a long career in the early days of Formula 1. 10 years between 1952 and 1962, driving for a whole host of teams, from private entered Ferraris to Maseratis, Connaughts to Vanwalls. Most interestingly of all was the David Brown Aston Martins, something we'll probably talk about in a future video. His best year was 1958 with the Cooper team, 3 podiums and 4th in the overall standings, but never a race winner. He may be the first Formula 1 driver to race in the British Saloon Car Championship. Starting in 1959 in a John Coombs Jaguar, he finished 9th overall, even though he only entered 3 races. 1960 he entered a single race, winning his first touring car race, before 3 wins in 1961 and a 5th overall, a single win at Crystal Palace in 1962, and a final win in 1963 saw out a pretty good touring car career. So that is a list of a further 10 drivers who raced in both BTCC and Formula 1. There's still more to come, and I aim to do the next one for 31st of July, as that was the first ever episode nearly a year ago. So make sure you subscribe for that, leave a comment with your thoughts, and most importantly of all, have a good one.